On the defense side, what I found so problematic, everything is seen from the perspective of risk. This terrible, tragic circumstance happened in somebody's life. Their job is to consistently look at something like that and put a number on it. It's very impersonal.
Sure.
As you know, when you save the insurance company a dime, they say, okay, good job, right?
Next one.
Yeah, here's the next one. When you truly take the worst circumstances that happen in somebody's life and give them some hope for the future, that is the type of work that I saw myself really being rewarded by.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 9 of the Prachtical Law Podcast. Today, we are sitting down with a great lawyer here at Pracht Injury Lawyers, and that's Kyle Brady. We're going to talk to Kyle today about how he found his way to the plaintiff side of practice, his experience from working for a large defense firm in South Carolina, and just talk about life in general and his perspective on personal injury law. So, Kyle, thank you for joining us today, brother.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, man. So, you have been with Pracht Injury Lawyers for how long now?
Since November of 2023.
So we're going on 3 years.
Yeah.
God, this seems like that flew by.
Oh, absolutely. It feels like it just started.
I know.
But, it's just a testament to, how much work we have and how many clients that we serve. And, time flies when you're having fun.
No doubt. So one of the unique things is I want to go back to and kind of get your story of how you came to the law. Just tell me what drove you to go to law school. Kind of tell me how you found yourself as a law student.
Yeah, it's funny because I come from a family of doctors and nurses. So the natural path for me would have been, going to college and getting through all the science courses and math courses and becoming a doctor or a PA or something like that. But that's never really where my talents lied, right? My talent has always been in communicating well. I was more into history and more into reading than I was into, coming up with calculations and such. I got into college actually with the intention of pursuing a medical career, and I realized pretty quickly that it wasn't for me, that I really had no interest in those sorts of courses.
And you're a Clemson guy, right?
Clemson guy.
All right.
Yep.
Okay.
So I grew up in Mount Pleasant.
Right.
I went to Clemson, so it was just enough space away from home, but just close enough to get back when I needed to. So, but yeah, college was really a time in which I really got to find myself and see where my passions lied. And that's when I really decided to pursue a career in the law.
Was there one thing, Kyle, when you were at Clemson that said, that you saw or experienced that said, hey, this is why I want to be a lawyer? Or was it just kind of a collection of where you found your talents?
I think it was a little bit of both. Can I point to one thing that really made me want to become a lawyer? No. But, it was where I saw myself developing as a professional, I guess, if that's if that makes any sense at all. And I thought it was the best way to leverage the talents that God gave me to help people the most. And ultimately, that was my goal in picking a career, and that's where I ended up.
So you had a strong law school career. I mean, I remember when I first interviewed you and got your resume and stuff like that, I was so impressed with your law school career. But you went to Wake Forest, so you went out of state. Like, as a South Carolina guy, I went in state. Well, what made you want to get out of South Carolina for a few years and go to law school elsewhere?
Yeah, so I've always wanted to be in South Carolina. I've always been in South Carolina. And so when I graduated from Clemson, I had the choice to go to Wake Forest, I think Florida State, or South Carolina were my three options. And really what it came down to is, I've always been in South Carolina. I wanted to experience something outside of the state. But I didn't want to be as far away as Tallahassee, right? So I just wanted to get out and see something new. So I went to Winston-Salem and went to Wake Forest.
How'd you like Winston-Salem? Cool town?
Very cool town. Yeah. Very cool town. Unfortunately, COVID only let me be there for a year and a half.
Really?
So, I graduated in 2021, so everything shut down in
How did they do that? Did you just do a whole year remote?
I think I did a year and a half remote.
Like from home?
From home. Yep.
So you weren't even on campus living in like a apartment somewhere in Winston-Salem? You were in Mount Pleasant?
Well, I had an apartment still in Winston-Salem, and I had to go up for a couple of things. But large majority of that last half of my law school experience was remote, which I'm grateful that the first half was in person.
Yeah, I bet.
because if the first half of my law school experience wasn't in person, I wouldn't have learned the things that I needed to learn, because there's only so much that you can do remote.
No, there is. It's see, that's why I like doing these podcasts. Like, I did not know that about you. I did not know that half your law school career was done from Mount Pleasant. And it makes me think about, gosh, what if half of your law school career you had to do it that way? And I would not have wanted to do that at all.
Well, it makes networking really hard.
Yes, right.
But thankfully, I always wanted to come back to South Carolina. So what it did is it allowed me to come back to South Carolina and actually clerk at a defense firm that I ended up getting my first job at. And so, everything works out pursuant to God's plan, and I think that was just part of it.
100% it does. So I want to talk about that, because when I was in law school, I did my summers after my first year. I worked clerk for a judge, but then after my second year, I worked at a defense firm. And so tell me about, your law school career. I know that you worked, I think, at the same firm kind of consistently throughout law school. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And so what drove you? I mean, and that was a civil defense firm, correct?
Yes.
All right. And so what drove you to kind of gain an interest in that side of the law, or how'd you wind up with those guys?
Yeah. So it's funny. My wife is in politics, right? So
right.
she does a lot of political stuff. And one of the partners at that firm, she had helped with his race. And
Okay.
so when she was doing that, of course, we had just started dating. This
Okay.
was back in, I think, 2018 or something.
Right.
And I really wanted to impress her. So I was his number one phone dialer. I called as many people as I could for his campaign.
Right.
I think I hit something like over 1,000 calls for his campaign. And so I obviously impressed her, because she ended up marrying me. But it's funny because, you mentioned like my good law school pedigree, or, all of the awards and different things that I got in law school. If you would have looked at my resume after my first year, I was in the bottom 20% of my class.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Really?
Yep. It was tough to find a clerkship.
Sure.
Being that low down. And I think really what law school taught me ultimately was the power of resilience.
Yeah.
Right? Because it would have been easy for me to give up after that first year, because it was really a shock to my system.
You had never been in the bottom 20%, I imagine, in your entire academic career
Right.
in anything.
Right.
Yeah.
What I did is, instead of giving up like a lot of people would have, or instead of just accepting the fact that I was underperforming compared to everybody else, I busted my tail. I would study every single day. I'd make sure I understood all the legal concepts we were learning on a very granular, detailed level.
Right.
And I ended up outperforming everybody else in the school for the rest of my law school career.
That's
So,
amazing, man.
Yeah.
So, and resilience, it's funny you say that. I think, in the law, it's easy to give up, quite frankly. You read a case, you read a statute, and you say,
yeah.
the law's against us, right? But I have found that the truly great lawyers, they understand the challenge and say, this is not good for us, but they don't give up, right? They say, how can I, because there's a lot of ways around a lot of things in the law. I think we've learned that.
Yeah.
And so, well, tell me about, okay, so you got this job at this defense firm, your law school career took off, and you ended up going to work there, right, at law school, correct?
Yep. So kind of tying it in with this whole resilience deal, that firm, because of all that work I did on the campaign, I think they really took a chance on me in bringing me in. And that really, a lot of what they did was personal injury work.
Right.
It wasn't fender benders, wasn't car wrecks, but it was a lot of retail and hospitality personal injury work.
Gotcha.
And so I got exposed to some of the higher level concepts of how these cases work. How they're valued by insurance companies, how insurance companies work at a younger age in my law school career. And that kind of ignited my passion for personal injury work.
Right.
And so I wanted to continue along that path. And so I decided to stay with that firm.
That's great. I think now is a good time to tell the story of how we first met, ever. And so, as you remember, this was a tragic case that we worked on together. You were working on the defense. I think you were representing the Boy Scouts, actually, in that case, right? Remember, it was and I was representing this young victim, and it was a strange case, a boating accident case, and so I just remember working on the case, and I remember that you were just incredibly annoying and persistent with this discovery, and ended up, I think, hauling one of our private investigators into court because he hadn't turned over documents he was supposed to. And I remember being impressed throughout that entire case with your resilience, your persistence, and it's so easy to just let things go. Right. And my impression of you, even in an adversarial role, was here's a young lawyer that just doesn't let things go. He's going to, almost like a pit bull, he's going to grab hold of that bone and he's going to shake it until he gets everything out of it. Right. And so I remember being very impressed with you. But tell me about your experience in those early years and what you learned. Because again, Collins and Lacey, the firm you were with, I mean, one thing I will say about them always is I felt like they train their lawyers well on the fundamentals, right? So tell me about that, what you learned in your first couple years there.
Yeah, and I'll say, Collins and Lacey was a great place to work. It was a great place to really learn how to practice in this space. And it's funny. So when I first graduated from law school, one thing that most people, I think, don't understand is that when you're just out of law school, you have no idea how to practice law.
No, zero.
I mean, you know about some cases out of New York about tort claims or that happened back in the 1920s. But as far as the practice of law today, you know nothing. Yeah. So I remember my paralegal bringing me my first set of subpoenas to sign. Mm-hmm. And I was just looking at them. I didn't even know where to sign. Right. And so I brought them over to my paralegal, and I had to ask her where to sign. So my early years, it was a lot. There's a big learning curve, right?
Definitely.
You've really got to understand what you're doing before you just go and fake it. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of it was spent on just trying to develop my skill set. And a lot of that, honestly, was relying on support staff.
Sure.
And there's a good comparison, I think, with medicine. Like I said, I come from a medical family.
Right.
My dad always told me, you've got to treat the nurses as your best friends, because if you treat them poorly, they're not going to help you out when you need them. Right. Yep. And so I built, strong relationships with the paralegals and with the support staff that knew a lot more about how to actually practice law than I did at that time.
Sure.
And then I had good people above me as far as attorneys that entrusted me with some heavy cases, some hard cases where I really got to dig in and learn the nuances of how to practice.
That's a fine balance that I think it seemed to have worked out really well from you. It's like you want to empower a young lawyer and give them that confidence to go handle something on their own. But at the same time, it's like you got to understand you don't really know what you're doing either, right? Like this is balance, right? Right. And so I think that it seems like that was just a great experience for you, where you kind of got both. You got good mentorship, but you also had the ability to be empowered to do good work.
Certainly.
Okay, so you were at Collins and Lacey for a total of how long?
Let's see, I was there from August of 2021 through November of 2023. Okay, so just over 2 years.
2 years.
Yeah.
I know you handled a lot of cases where you were there, but we were introduced by a close mutual friend of ours, of course. But when did you start to say, because it sounds like it was a pretty good job you were in, I mean, when did you start to say, hey, I'm thinking of, as we say, going to the other side of the V or moving from a civil defense firm to a plaintiff's personal injury practice? Well, tell me about how that came about.
Funny enough, I think one of the turning points, at least, was the case that I worked with you on. Yeah, really. And I remember having a conversation with, I won't even say who, but somebody associated with the case where, I was saying, look, I think this case isn't really about the money. I think this case is more about the family wanting some sort of semblance of justice. Sure. Right. Yeah. And the response I got to that was, Kyle, you're a young lawyer, you're naive. It's always about the money. Yeah. And I disagree with that. I still disagree with that to this day, because I don't think that that's true whatsoever. But, it's important, for my answer to this question, but to frame like how these insurance companies think sometimes. Sure. Right. Because on the defense side, what I found so problematic with, just morally continuing to work on that side is everything is seen from the perspective of risk, right? It's like this terrible, tragic circumstance happened in somebody's life, right? Mm-hmm. It's a complete and total loss that you could never imagine going through yourself, right? Mm-hmm. And their job is to consistently look at something like that and put a number on it. Right. How much risk do we have bringing this case to trial versus how much can we mitigate by or how much money can we save by just settling at
It's a bean counting exercise
Yeah.
at the end of the day, right?
It's very impersonal.
Right.
And I didn't like that, right? I wanted something that was going to be more rewarding personally. I wanted to feel like at the end of the day, I helped somebody.
Sure.
As you know, when you save the insurance company a dime, they say, okay, good job, right?
Next one.
Yeah, here's the next one, right?
Right.
But when you truly take the worst circumstances that happen in somebody's life and give them some hope for the future, or an ability to move on financially, where otherwise they wouldn't have that. That is the type of work that I saw myself really being rewarded by.
Don't you think the most frustrating cases are the ones from our side of things are the ones where you can't do that through just through objective means? Maybe it's just a car wreck case where there's just no coverage and there's just no, you know what I mean? It's just like, that's all there is, right? Because I agree with you. I mean, I feel like in what we do, people, the money helps them maybe have hope and start a better future. But really, I think, particularly in the catastrophic cases, I'm talking death cases, people say, did my loved one's death or the loss of my loved one have meaning? Is the world going to be a better place because we've learned the lesson of their loss, right? Is kind of the way I would say it. And so it's just a different analysis on our side.
It is, yeah. One of the tougher cases that I think I've handled, being here at Pracht Injury Lawyers, was a death case where a guy was on a motorcycle and lost his life, and there's only $25,000 of insurance.
Yeah. And it's like you look everywhere, you get creative. You're like, how can we find somebody? But it is what it is, right?
And, I tell everybody that I love, you need to go and buy underinsured motorist coverage.
To the hilt, right?
Because nobody expects something like that to happen.
No.
You don't wake up in the morning and expect, your loved one to be hit by a tractor trailer. That kind of thing happens.
Sure.
And you got to have things in place to make sure that, your family's taken care of if something happened to you, or that you're taken care of if something happens to your loved one.
So I want to get this perspective, because I think you have a unique perspective on this. Having now in your career, and you're still very young in your career, but you've had, almost 3 years at a civil defense firm and now almost 3 years at a civil plaintiffs firm. Tell me how working on the defense side of things has helped you be a better plaintiff's lawyer and represent injury victims better.
Yeah. So, on the defense side, a lot of the work, honestly, is reporting up to the insurance company. Hey, this is what's going on with the case. This is the legal analysis. This is why we win, or this is why we lose. Right. Here's the value range that we put on the case. Here's what we think you should bring to the table to try to settle it. Right. And that analysis, I think, doing that on every single one of the cases, because I was primarily the one as the young associate that was responsible for putting those reports together.
Sure.
I learned so much through doing that. Not only did I learn the nuances of the law with different claims that came through the door, but I also learned how insurance companies tend to value cases. Right. So I can leverage that now for our clients, in that, I know the analysis they go through, right?
Sure.
I know the general report that they go through, and I know what numbers they usually put on cases.
You've seen behind the curtain.
Right.
Well, best way to put it.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that helps me understand and prepare the client for, okay, this is where I think the insurance company is probably going to come in to try to settle this case at say, mediation or, settlement negotiations. And oftentimes we can leverage that information to get the highest part of that range that the insurance company would be willing to pay. For example, I had a slip and fall in a hotel bathroom.
Okay.
And I think a lot of people that would have looked at that case would have said, oh, it was just an accident. There's no real liability there. Well, I'd been on the other side of things. We handled a lot of slip and falls. I know that it's not always what it seems on the surface, right? It's not always just somebody accidentally slipping. A lot of times there's some things underneath the surface that you kind of have to flesh out. And what we found is, during this exact time in which he fell, there was a gap between, them realizing these bathtubs were real old, right? And them actually hiring people to come and fix them, but they never warned that they were old or defective in the period when my client fell before that work was done.
Yeah, so I get it. So you had a situation where the hotel looks at it and says, oh, we got these out-of-date bathrooms. They're probably dangerous. We need to fix them. We need to replace them. they're in the process of doing that, but they don't do anything to tell their customers, hey, this is what's going on.
Right. And so it's one of those things that, it seems like one thing on the surface, but when you dig into it and realize, oh wait, this wasn't just a normal bathtub. This was a really old bathtub that was that was real slick, right?
Yeah.
When you dig into a case, sometimes you can find little nuggets of gold like that.
So what from your defense experience in that bathtub slip and fall case led you to know to dig deeper?
Honestly, I handled a lot of cases from a big hotel chain on the defense side, and I know there's a lot under the surface that doesn't always come to light, especially before a claim is brought. With some of these bigger chains, I mean, a lot of times that's the case, right? So I knew, look, there's a chance that this is nothing when we filed the suit, right? But there's also a big chance that there's something to this.
Sure.
Right.
It's worth the risk to find out.
Right. Because, I'm a big believer in this too. Catastrophic accidents don't always happen in a vacuum, right? There's usually something that adds to it where there's some sort of corporate responsibility. Yeah. And what you owe to your client is to dig into that and see what's there.
One thing I'm curious about from your time on the defense side is your impression of plaintiff lawyers and the ones that did it right versus the ones that did it wrong, right? I imagine you saw both.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And so tell us a little bit about that. I mean, was there ever a case that you handled on the defense side where you saw some serious exposure for your client, but maybe the plaintiff's lawyer just missed it, didn't do the work, just mailed it in, whatever, and you guys ended up, probably paying a lot less than the claim was really worth not because of anything you did your job, you defended the client, but because the plaintiff's lawyer didn't go that extra mile. Did you ever have that experience?
I did, yes. So it was actually a hotel case. It was a slip and fall, and a slip and fall on tile.
Okay.
The case really came down to, okay, what was the slipperiness level? They call it coefficient of friction.
Oh yeah, I've read about that in case law before, and we've used that. Yeah.
And so, and everything was disclosed in discovery, right? The hotel, right after the slip and fall, went and put a slip-proof coating over the tile.
And that was disclosed in discovery.
That was disclosed. And when the expert for the plaintiff went and tested the slipperiness of the tile, it was barely over the standard, meaning it was just in compliance with the standard. After
they did the subsequent remedial measure, we'll call it, or whatever, right?
Correct. So after they put the slip proofing on, it was barely over the standard. Well, they just accepted that test at face value, never looked into the fact that, at the time that their client slipped,
it's a different floor.
It was a lot more slippery. It was a different floor, right?
Wow.
And so we actually got that one done for way under what I think it would have been worth.
Yeah, and so in that case, if that plaintiff's lawyer had come back to you and said, look, we're right at the threshold after you improved it. So that stands to reason that before you improved it, you would be far below the threshold or whatever. Right. You think that would have been a value driver in the case.
Absolutely, and it would have been a good argument.
And it just wasn't made. His argument wasn't made.
Absolutely.
Now let's look at the other side of that coin. Tell me about, did you have an experience where you dealt with a very highly effective plaintiff's lawyer that you felt, really squeezed every inch out of a case? Did you have that experience?
Plenty of times.
Yeah.
Numerous times. I think the best plaintiff's attorneys, first off, they bring good cases.
Right.
They don't bring cases or try to stretch the law where it can't be stretched. Right. They bring good cases first off. So the facts are never good on the defense side, against firms like that. I can think of several, and they're still high performing plaintiffs firms to this day. I mean, Yarborough Applegate, whenever we had a case against them, you better watch out, Well,
that's what I always say. I always say, who your lawyer is matters. Anybody that doesn't believe that needs to go look at the O.J. Simpson case, right? But is that true? I mean, on the defense side of things, when you guys see certain names on pleadings or certain names on some law firms on pleadings, does that change the evaluation?
It absolutely does. And, you remember that report that I told you I filled out for each case? There's an entire section of that report on, okay, who's the plaintiff's attorney?
Right.
Who are they? What kind of results have they had? Right. Because like you said, who your lawyer is absolutely matters.
Yeah.
And we actually had a list of firms, and they're like, don't mess with these firms. Right. If you get a limits demand from this firm, you better take it seriously. You better really pay attention to it, and you better inform everybody. And funny enough, Pracht Injury Lawyers was on the list.
Oh, I'm glad. It's up to us to keep it on the list, right? I want to talk about this. So, here you are You graduate law school in 21?
21.
Okay, so you are 5 years into your legal career as we sit here today. What do you see the next 5, 10 years looking like? Where's your passion? Where do you want to grow your practice and your ability to help people? What do you see the future as?
Where I think I'm most rewarded is helping people through catastrophic circumstances, whether that be wrongful death, whether that be circumstances with their children. I'm really big into helping kids, especially, we've had several child sexual assault cases that we've helped families navigate.
You've done great work on those, by the way. Those are hard cases.
Very hard cases.
And a lot of lawyers just aren't interested in them, but you've done great work on those. And I agree with you. I think that's God's work we're doing there on those, for
Absolutely. Sure. And they're nuanced too, because a lot of times they're against government institutions. Yeah. And as you know as well as I do, there are certain limitations on what you can recover from.
Suing the government's hard, man.
Right.
I mean, it ain't easy.
But talk about finding ways around things, right? We've, in a couple of our cases, have found a way to bring federal claims that, completely obliterate the caps, right? So, I mean, there's none of the state level caps for damages apply to these federal claims. And, we've had success representing clients on those with these terrible things that happen to the children.
Sure.
And that's something that sticks with the child for the rest of their life.
It really does.
The damages, they don't get higher than that. They really don't.
They really don't. They really don't. Well, I hope that in the next few years we can do more of that work and continue to do the good work that we've done. Where do you think personal injury law and representing, victims is going to be in 10 years?
I think, we can't have this conversation without talking about AI.
Right.
Because I think AI is going to change a lot of what we know about the world and a lot of what we know about the practice. And it's hard to predict, how far it's going to go.
I know.
Right.
I know.
It's a little bit scary to think about too.
Yeah. I saw Trial Magazine the other day sent me this thing. It had a robot arguing to a jury. And it's like, is that where we're going to be? I don't know. I mean, it's already impacting. Let me ask you this. How are you using AI right now in your practice to benefit your clients?
Yeah, I mean, AI is a huge help, especially on big files, right? Where we have thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of documents. AI can sift through those in a heartbeat, right? One of the dangers with AI that, I think lawyers need to be aware of is, the privacy of client files, right? Yeah. So, our firm has our AI system set up to where
totally cut off from, anyone, it's encrypted, I guess is the best way to say it.
Right. And so there's no way that our client information gets out of our closed-in system. And so, it's important that as we use these tools, we use them responsibly. And I think we do that well here at Pracht Injury Lawyers. But, sifting through case files, helping us understand, okay, where are the things that we need to go take a look at in the file, right? And that saves a lot of time and makes our jobs more efficient on the client's behalf and allows us to move faster to resolve clients' claims.
It really does. We had that mediation recently, and I ran through AI the case file and said, hey, give me an outline of a mediation statement I was preparing. And I had looked through the file, I had done it, but it caught several great facts that just either I didn't appreciate were that good of a fact when I was reading it, but went back, double checked it, made sure it was accurate. But like that whole thing of our client having 17 pallbearers, that was, I have to give credit to AI for that fact that we talked about in the mediation, because I just wouldn't have, I either missed it or didn't understand the importance of it. But AI said, hey man, you ought to mention this.
Right, because certain things are less important in some contexts and more important in other contexts. And so, when you're looking for things that could, ding the defendant on a liability issue, right? You're not necessarily looking for some of the things that could really show how loved somebody was, right? Or how many friends they had to come in and support them.
Yeah. So what concerns you about AI though?
So the one thing from like a business perspective, just as lawyers, is I think that a lot of lawyers are going to go out of business on the transactional side. Because if you think about, what transactional lawyers do is they draft contracts all day, or they work on mergers and acquisitions, and they're not necessarily in court arguing to people like you and I are.
Yeah, no, exactly.
And so I think a lot of those folks are really in jeopardy of losing their jobs to AI, because now AI can do a lot of that stuff, and AI can do it with less mistakes.
A lot of the heavy lifting, right? Do you remember in law school, and you might not have because you were up at Wake, but in South Carolina, I know there was a time when Nelson Mullins, big defense firm, they would have some huge case. I had no idea what it was, but they would put out a posting and they'd say, we're paying lawyers like $80 an hour, or 100 young lawyers, maybe in law students, just for doc review.
Right.
I have to believe that that's not going to go on anymore with AI, right?
Yeah, and those are some of the first jobs that
are going to go, right?
as well. Yeah.
And then, like you said, then at some level, if I'm like, let's just say I'm running a real estate transaction firm, and all these documents can get drafted, and really where I may have needed 5 lawyers to run that firm before I can do it with 2. Right. So I agree with you. I think it's going to transform things.
Yeah. So the question is, what happens to those lawyers once they lose their jobs? Where are the law jobs?
Where do they go?
They go to personal injury.
I think so. They go to personal injury. They go to, I don't know, because it's probably going to affect like probate and estate. Think about like drafting of wills,
right.
Trust. I mean, you're telling me that those aren't going to be the first things to go to? Yeah.
And if most of the transactional jobs are taken up, the only jobs left for lawyers are to go and figure out how to argue in court. Right? And so I think we're going to see an influx in the marketplace of, more, we're already saturated with personal injury firms as it is.
You're saying this and I'm just like, oh my God, we don't need a bunch more lawyers.
I certainly could see a lot of transactional attorneys as AI takes over more and more, pivoting over to the personal injury space. And so that would just be an interesting thing to see, competition-wise,
what that looks like. Do you think AI is going to destroy the entire need for lawyers, or just reduce the man hours that lawyers are required to put in?
I think it's going to make lawyers a lot more efficient. And, the work that you and I do, I don't think will be replaced by AI. I'm a strong believer in that, because what we do is we really interface with people, right? Our business is people.
Yeah.
And being somebody who communicates and helps somebody through a really hard time is not something that an AI robot can do effectively.
No.
And I think, a lot of people are trying out these, AI therapists.
Right. I read about that.
And really what happens is AI just tends to affirm your worst qualities. And turns you into a much worse person than you would be under the guise of helping you.
Right.
And I think where us lawyers come in and, as people, right, is, people are always going to want people to communicate to them. They're always going to want people to argue to them, right? We've got a constitutional right to a jury trial, right?
Thank goodness.
Yep. And so there's always going to be a need for what we do, which is show up in person and argue in court.
Yep.
Right.
I said that I saw, and I can't remember where, we were in Chicago. We were in Chicago for that legal seminar, and I can't remember his name. He's a great trucking attorney. He said that. He was like, look, all the other jobs will go before the litigator does. The person who can stand up in a courtroom, advocate on behalf of his client, is a unique skill. And to your point where you were talking about people transitioning into personal injury law, I think you would agree with me that not everybody is built to go be a true trial lawyer. That's a kind of a unique skill. And most people would say, I don't even want to do that, right? Like Chris, like, yeah, you mean it's not. And so there will only be a percentage of those who transfer over that I think can really do that work, get into a courtroom.
Yeah, and just like in any other profession, right? In the law, there are so many different personalities. Mm-hmm. And it takes a certain type of personality to be able to communicate to a jury well, and to be able to do the type of work that we do and connect with clients well. And a lot, like it or not, a lot of the transactional lawyers are introverts.
Yeah, they are. That's it. 100%.
Yeah, and they're just not built for it, right? And that's not a bad thing. It's just, the reality of how humans work.
Kyle, it's been awesome having you on here today. Your perspective from both the defense side and the plaintiff side is invaluable. Any anecdotes or any thoughts you want to leave us with before we close out?
I'll just hit one. Okay. And this is kind of, this memory, I guess, is kind of what drives my compassion for some of the folks that we serve. I remember being in a mediation on a terrible child abuse case that involved daycare. Okay. And I represented the individual daycare worker that actually had abused the child.
Got it.
And I was there, and then the defense attorney for the actual daycare was there.
The corporate defendant.
Yep, with a separate adjuster from the same insurance company. And at mediation, we do these opening arguments, right, where the plaintiff gives their side of the case, and the defense gives the other side of the case.
Sure.
So of course, I knew the gravity of the situation, and I spent my entire opening apologizing on behalf of my client to the other side, because there's no mistaking the tragic circumstances and the fact that what happened was terrible, and everything was on video. I mean, there's nothing to really dispute. And I remember after giving that opening, originally we were supposed to be in the same room for mediation, my client and the daycare. The adjuster was so mad at me that I would acknowledge through an apology that something terrible had happened. She was so mad at me that she didn't want to speak to me again, and she didn't want me in the same room as her.
Wow.
But we ended up settling the case for, probably less than it was worth. And the mediator came and talked to me afterwards and said, the only reason that family decided to settle the case today is because of your apology. And that, I think, just goes to the fact that, at the end of the day, people want to be treated like people. Not everything is a risk analysis, right? And, these tragedies or these horrible things that happen in people's lives, it's not all about the money. And so that's a valuable lesson that I learned during my time on the defense side, both how these adjusters think and how these insurance companies think versus the reality of the situation. And, I think that's something that juries connect with too is, really the human side of things.
They do. That's a wonderful, wonderful story, Kyle. And I think it is illustrated by the fact of if you go look at most big verdicts, right, what they call nuclear verdicts, but, large verdicts, usually I have found there is a tone deaf defendant on the other side of it, right? If you go dig into those cases, there's usually an opportunity the defendant had to settle the case for pennies versus what the verdict ultimately was, and that was rejected because, again, they were tone deaf, right? So that's a wonderful story. Thank you for sharing that with us, man.
As an old partner that I used to work with at Collins and Lacey always said, if you're sitting there at trial nowadays, because we settle most of our cases, if you're sitting there at trial, one of you, either you or the other side, has horribly miscalculated.
Probably so. All right, man. Well, Kyle, thanks for joining us today. And folks, thanks for joining us for episode 9 of Prachtical Law, a podcast which tries to give actionable insights to practitioners. And we're really happy to have had Kyle Brady with us today. This was a great conversation about getting a perspective from both the defense side and the plaintiff side and just learning about Kyle's story. So please reach out to us at 864-LAW if we can be of help. Subscribe, like our podcast, join the YouTube channel. We're trying to get this out to as many folks as possible, and we look forward to seeing you on episode 10 of the Prachtical Law Podcast.